Hi everybody, hope you're doing marvellously well. Hope you're staying safe, happy and healthy. We are back with another frequently asked questions, another FAQ Friday. So we've got lots of rather wonderful questions this week. A couple of fun ones I'm going to get stuck into. But please, if you haven't already, go to producelikeapro.com. You can sign up for the email list. And you can also get a whole bunch of free goodies. And if you haven't, please hit the subscribe bell. That would be fantastic. Oh, the bell itself will notify you when we have more videos coming out. Okay, so let's get stuck in. Is there something known as sounding too perfect? I'm not sure what you or other people's opinions are of this, but I personally find that music that sounds flawless is a big turnoff. I'm not interested in music that sounds fake, like most modern pop, rap, dance, dub, metal, etc. Classic musicians like Neil Young, Crazy Horse, The Band, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, The Who, etc. Their songs have a certain natural rawness to them, which I find intriguing. It's real. What is your take on that? Thanks. That's such a massive question. So, wow, and I think it's a huge can of worms. Because I think it's very easy to sort of buy into a stereotypical idea of like everything at a certain period of time was amazing and everything isn't now. And we all know as fans of music, that's just not the truth. I know it's easy to say that because it will get people on either side, and that's a great way to, you know, get a lot of views and feedback. I was like, yes. The reality is like the way I look at it is, yes, there's certain music that I don't really personally enjoy as much as other kinds of music. But when I look at those classic artists, and I agree with quite a few of those, if not all of those classic artists, I can tell you they did albums, like Tom Petty in particular. I mean, Tom Petty's more modern albums, at least from like the late 70s on, like, you know, Damn the Torpedoes, all the way through all of the stuff he did with, you know, Last Dance for Mary Jane and Free Falling. Those are production masterpieces. And everything is in tune and in time. Is it gridded and perfect? No. But it certainly still translates onto the radio. I think of one of my favorite bands, but probably my favorite band, Queen. If I think of an album like The Game, that was recorded in 79, released in 80. It's pretty darn perfect, at least as perfect as could be. I think it's okay to understand that if you listen to some early recordings in the 60s or 70s of those artists, it's like some of it doesn't sound quite as modern. It doesn't have the extended low end we can reproduce, and of course it doesn't have the high track count. And even those albums that did have high track counts tended to start to sound muddy or cloudy because they're bouncing within take after take after take. However, listen to The Wall. The Wall was recorded in, I believe, definitely 79, maybe even parts of 78, but definitely in 79. Go put that on. I mean, that is an extremely well-recorded, well-mixed, well-written, well-performed album that, once again, put it on and then listen to something modern, and it pretty much, no, it doesn't pretty much, it definitely stands the test of time. So I think there's a period for me, this is very personal, but there's a period for me of the mid-late 70s to the mid-80s where a lot of bands did pretty seminal work, some of their best work. The technology was fantastic. There was Studio 2-inch tape machines like we have. There was SSL 4000 consoles out. And Peter Gabriel. I mean, go listen to Peter Gabriel. So I rest my case. Listen to Sledgehammer. There's plenty of music that was recorded by insanely talented people. Bowie, Kate Bush, Gabriel. Listen to their records of that period and they are phenomenal sounding and they still sound super modern and super just engaging and beautiful and passionate. So I think it's more of a discussion about, for me at least, it's more of a discussion of like, you know, a band that maybe put out an album in the mid-early 70s that was a little sloppy. Maybe they tuned to the piano in the studio. Not everybody was like perfectly in. Sometimes people slowed down the tape to slow down the tempo, so it's a little warbly. I mean, there's all these kind of things. I still love that. I'm a huge Velvet Underground fan. Go listen to Velvet Underground's albums. Listen to their live album recorded on a tape player live at Max's Kansas City by two fans sitting in the bar. Those are still amazing records. So for me, it's all about context. I know I can play some Tom Petty records which sound super modern, like everything, extended low end, brightness and everything. The Rick Rubin produced stuff, phenomenal. The stuff with Jim Scott engineering, amazing, still stands the test of time. So I think it's less about a sort of now and then, and more about, and I agree with you, more about an emotion, a rawness, yes, but I don't think it's as easy as saying that music now doesn't sound good and then did, because there's still a period which makes sense in these modern ears. Still plenty of artists that made records which just translate. And then there's just stuff that just defies all sense of logic. Like you can put on the Beach Boys, Good Vibrations, and it just defies sense of logic. I think Bohemian Rhapsody still sounds like, wow, what is that? So I think greatness overcomes all of those kind of things. I think the discussion might be a little bit more or better aimed at using virtual instruments rather than organic, because one of the realities, I'm not going to say issues, but one of the realities with using virtual instruments is their lack of dynamic range, because they're usually perfectly recorded by the most amazing engineer in the best studio ever. And unless you're going to really be an amazing piano player who can reproduce the performance under your fingertips, you're going to get something a lot more sterile. And some of the things that we love about organic instruments are the fact that they're a little wrong. You know, when you play an acoustic guitar, the way you fret it, even a millimeter or two, either way, can make it ring a little bit less or a little bit more, but we like those idiosyncrasies. So, but then go and listen to The Wall and listen to Dave Gilmour's acoustic guitar playing. Listen to the performances, listen to just how beautifully, imperfectly perfect they are. And it's still very hard to listen to something modern that's just as good sounding as that. So I think that's another thing, is I feel a little bit like I still reference those albums. I reference The Wall. I reference The Wall all the time. I reference the Cure stuff in the 80s. Go listen to Lullaby. It's phenomenal sounding. You know, this is more of a discussion of a certain period and a certain genre, because I believe that a lot of the bands we're talking about here made incredible sounding records in the late 70s, 80s, and even through the 90s. Stuff that stands the test of time. It's more of a technology thing for me, maybe in 50s, 60s, and maybe early 70s. Sometimes the technology meant that, you know, a lot of generations of bounces made things not quite sound so crisp and bright. Look, I remember sitting in a room doing a panel, for instance, with Tim Palmer, and we were having this discussion over tape and digital. And there was sort of a split between everybody who loved tape, and then there was people that not necessarily loved digital, but appreciated it. And Tim has been blessed to make records with Robert Plant, Tears for Fears, Pearl Jam. Through the 80s and the 90s, he made some absolutely massive albums. Tin Machine, did 2 albums with Tin Machine. David Bowie, I rest my case. And he said, I don't like tape. And we were like, why? And he goes, because it sounded bright and full. And then I bounced it onto tape and played it back, and I had to boost the EQ and add hiss, because it didn't sound as good coming back off the tape as the way I was hearing it in the studio. And that is sort of a reality. You know, it doesn't have that. The thing about digital, love it or hate it, it will give you a perfect reproduction of what you hear. Now, that can turn into a 5-hour discussion below, and I'm feel free to have those discussions. But we have the benefit of everything now. If you want to get a tape machine, get a tape machine. If you want to then transfer it to a DAW to edit, do that. If you want to edit on tape, just like people were doing in the 60s and 70s. Every engineer and producer that I'm friends with that made albums in the 60s and 70s edited tape. Edited drums on tape, did all kinds of stuff, triggered sounds, you know, speakers under snare drums. We all know about that one. That was an old one. There was even systems with sticks hitting snare drums off a gated snare. I've seen it all, heard it all. Then don't forget that the early digital delays that came out in the mid 70s were also being used to, you guessed it, trigger samples in the 70s. So all of this stuff has existed. People have always cheated and done things. And it's how do you define cheating? If you're Mozart or Beethoven, it's here's the manuscript, everything else is meaningless. Then you're on a wax cylinder, you've got to get it perfect on the wax cylinder. Then the 2-track comes in and it's courtesy of Blumline, and we've got stereo. Everybody's going to look back, and then of course the 4-track comes in. It's like, oh my God, you're cheating, you're overdubbing. Should just be the performance. And then the 8-track comes in. It's like, oh my God, we used to be able to do it on 4 tracks. And then the 16-track comes in. I can't believe you're using a 16-track. We used to do it on 8-track, and then 24, and then 224s, and then 48 digital. And wherever we go, there's always going to be this idea that, you know, it was always better before. And I totally understand, because I love The Who. I love The Who. I love the Kinks. I love Bowie. I love his old stuff, his newer stuff. The stuff he did just before he died is amazing, and everything in between. But I don't listen to it with that bias that something was brilliant before and it no longer is. I think that music has changed in many people's lives, and its importance has definitely changed, but not for me. And not for the people I surround myself with. And I think that's okay. I think that's okay. I think it's a developmental process. And I think if there are guys and girls out there making incredible sounding EDM, and they can bring in other elements as they grow into other stuff and create something absolutely amazing, then great. I can tell you through my life now of going like over 3 decades of making music, wow. I've seen these things happen every time. For me, I think some of the worst period of music was late 90s, early 2000s. I absolutely hated rock at that period. I loved Soundgarden. I loved all those bands that were coming out late 80s, early 90s. Loved it. It was amazing. But then it started getting into that every record sounded the same. Every drum sound was the same. It was the same mixers on every record, and everything was like tap 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 tap. And that was when auto-tune hit rock, and everything was like, you put on those albums by so many of those bands, and it's literally like listening to 10 songs that are identical. If we had YouTube in 2001, that could be the discussion. I get it. I understand. I relate. The Who, arguably top 5 greatest artists of all time. And it's a pity that they weren't making great records through the 80s and 90s in the same way many, many other bands are doing. But, you know, listen to Radiohead. They, to me, justify this conversation. Listen to Muse. They justify this conversation. There's plenty of artists that do music that we can gravitate towards. And maybe there's not a huge plethora of them at the moment. I agree. There's not the days where we had that period in the mid-90s when it was just dominated by rock and alternative rock. That was a great time, but not all of it was fantastic. For every Soundgarden, there was lots of won't mention the bands, they're really obvious who they are. But so it's, you know, I think Paul McCartney or somebody said that about the Beatles. You could take a week where the Beatles were number 1, and for every Beatles at number 1, there's 4 or 5 songs in there which were almost like comedy records by today's standards that were also in the top 10. It wasn't a great time in like 66 that everybody in the top 40 was changing the world. There was just as much, you know, pre-packaged pop in those days, you know, so it's easy to argue either point. I just have to really be passionately say that some of my favourite records, as far as I'm concerned, Out of the Blue by ELO, still sounds amazing. Put on Mr. Blue Sky. Go and put on Mr. Blue Sky. Get off this video. Put on Mr. Blue Sky through a decent pair of speakers or a decent pair of headphones and tell me that it's not modern. It still sounds absolutely phenomenal. There was great music made then, which stands the test of the time now. And yes, it was made by geniuses like Roger Waters and Jeff Lynne. It was made by people, Peter Gabriel, people with unbelievably high expectations of music. So I think the question is not necessarily about, you know, the music then and now, which is the easy discussion and well, get more views. But I don't believe that. I believe the discussion is about getting passionate about making music. And you know what? Make music that good. Write Mr. Blue Sky. Write Bohemian Rhapsody. You know, write those songs. Get real musicians in a room. Record them really, really well. Great performances, great songs. And all of this is meaningless. The whole discussion is meaningless because if you write a song of any genre that people love, it will chart. It's always been that world. For every single time, you know, there's a whole genre has taken over. Something just comes in out of nowhere. I mean, look when Lorde happened a few years ago. When she happened with that Royals song, there was nothing like that. It was like just vocals and the simplest beat. You know, I love that song. I think the vocal harmonies are great. It's really super catchy. But the point is, like, a rock band could do something like that, could break a mold. What's happened now is, like, bands feel like they have to be one song or one sound. Pink Floyd were never that. Queen were never that. The Who were never that. They were never like, oh, guitar, bass and drums. Yeah, AC/DC were, but who cares? That's AC/DC. Not everybody has to be like, oh, here's our sound. This is our sound. This is the thing we write. No, go and put on the game. I know I talk about it all the time, but put it on. What is the sound? Is it Dragon Attack? Like basically early Queen rock? Is it Play the Game or Save Me? Classic harmonies Queen? Is it Crazy Little Thing Called Love? 50s song? Or is it another one, Bites the Dust? Disco. The point is, it's all there. Billy Joel, Glass Houses, put that on. What's his genre? Is it the 50s? Still rock and roll to me? Like, the point is like, get your artists. If you are an artist, you're a band, or you're working with them, get them, inspire them, play them music like that. I talk about it all the time. Collaboration and blending of styles is the way it is. I like blues rock as much as the next person, but I don't think it's the answer. It's not the answer. It's one of the many elements that I love. Truth is one of my favorite records. Jeff Beck Truth is a masterpiece. I met Jeff Beck and we talked about it, and I was like, between that and Blow by Blow, amazing. But Jeff Beck doesn't want to make Truth or Blow by Blow anymore. He does albums with like programming and stuff in it and pushes the boundaries. So that's my point. Find stuff, find music, blend it together. None of us should be like tied into this idea that it was all better then and everybody used to be a genius and now we're not. It's just not. That's just not the real world. It's really up to us to challenge the artists. You know, I'm a guy with kids, so my kids aren't that old yet, but there's going to be a time when they're going to be the age of my artists. So I've got to bring that passion and that love of music. And so when that band and those young artists are in the room, I need to inspire them to make something great. And I do it all the time. I put on Ashes to Ashes by David Bowie and say, that's the kind of vocal I want. What voice is it? Is it, do you remember? Is it the falsetto? Is it the, oh no, don't say it? And is it the spoken stuff? Then that mid-range, I got a message from the ash. Then the whispers around it. That's 1979, released in 1980. You know, is that old? It doesn't. It still sounds amazing. Scary Monsters is an amazing sounding record that has absolutely... So this idea that, you know, now we're all lost and everything's too perfect and the old stuff doesn't make any sense anymore is not true. There's plenty of incredible albums by amazing artists that break that mold. Anyway, thank you ever so much for the amazing question, because I do agree with you in principle. I just want to point out that essentially so many artists have made records that stand the test of time in all ways, and that is the challenge. Those are the records we need to be making. They've got to hit on every level, the songs, the performance, the production, everything. And we have the technology now around us, in the box, outside of the box, everywhere. It's affordable. We have the technology to make those records. So my challenge is, go make those records. I don't have a bass. All I have is a local Strat imitation and an interface. So for bass, can I just record my guitar and pitch it down an octave? If yes, how can I make that work? Or am I better going for a VST? Bass programming takes a lot of time and I'm a bit lazy. Oh, what a fantastic question. I mean, obviously, bass programming, I suppose if you're not a keyboard player, it might be a little annoying, but, you know, it could definitely work. But I've done it. Why don't we just try it? For Schnitz and Schniggles, I'm going to grab, I have a $200 Pacifica that I bought used. So that hopefully will be equivalent to what you're using. I bought it from eBay. I bought a couple of them, but I bought this one from eBay for a couple $100. So we'll use that and we'll try it. We'll try playing a bass line on the guitar and then making it come down an octave. I think the reality is that you might have to do some tuning stuff depending on how hard you play the strings. So you pluck it very hard, the string goes sharp for a bit, until it comes back. So you hit it hard, it actually will go a little sharp. So we have to play softer. It might sound pretty darn good. I have done it. My old guitar mentor, Ollie Alcott, used to do it. He would take his 4-track cassette, double speed it, play everything, you know, double speed on the lowest strings and then bring it down to the regular tempo, and he had a bass line. Sounded pretty fantastic. But then He's a great musician and he's very smart. And that was on a 4-track cassette. So let's try it in a DAW. Okay, so I've got this guitar. Maybe it's more expensive when it was new, but it was $225, I think, on eBay. I love it. It's the only shredder guitar I've got. And I really love Pacificas, and I'm also all about not spending a huge amount of money if I can get something great that's affordable. So got this used for $225. We're keeping this inexpensive. We're going just cables straight into the Audient, and I'm just going to open up a channel. We're going to go DI only. So this is going to be the line. So what I'm doing is I'm going to use the neck pickup. This is actually a humbucker. I suppose I could use because you said you had a Strat, so I'll go for the middle. But if you're going to be on a Strat, I would use the neck pickup, even if it's single coil. It's going to give you the most warmth. But anyway, we'll try it. See what happens. So let's try it. Let's have a listen in solo to what I did. Okay, so that's pretty bratty, pretty bad. That's the keyboard bass, which I'm now going to mute. But I left it in because it was a good reference. Get rid of those last 2 notes, we don't need them. Okay. All right, moment of truth. Let's go to Audio Suite here and just pitch shift. We've got a different pitch ones. Let's have a look at pitch 2. Okay, we'll go down exactly 1 octave. I mean, probably what I would do is just for schnitz and sniggles, just grab like, I don't know, like an L1 or something. Sounds dreadful on its own, but how's it sound in the track? I mean, it's kind of bad, but kind of not. The main thing that's happened here is like with that generic pitch changes, everything's shifted a bit out of time. So let's edit it in time. It's quite often you got things that in solo you're like, oh, it's painful. See, it all depends on context. So I feel like that was the first plugin we used and I didn't do any kind of experimenting. If you had Auto-Tune or Melodyne, you could probably pitch correct those. I don't see why not. I mean, with a track that's quite, I wouldn't say perfect, but this track's quite, you know, tightened and, you know, the drums sound pretty kind of consistent. A messed up, funky, kind of weird bass line actually sounds kind of cool. I mean, soloed, it's pretty horrific, but in the track. I like that second half a lot. I mean, I sort of like Messed Up, and I think the right combination of Messed Up with really good works. You know, it goes back to that whole conversation we were having at the beginning about this perception that everything is really perfect and everything didn't used to be, which I sort of agree with and sort of don't. Because another thing we could talk about when we're talking about that first one was listen to any like Mutt Lange production, Def Leppard, you know, stuff like that is so well recorded, and so performances are absolutely amazing. And a lot of those records just stand the test of time. So anyway, but a little wrongness like this could go a long way. Is it perfect? No. You could probably melodyne it and make it a little bit more perfect. I think it comes down to, your question is like, you know, is that quicker and easier for you to do, the 5 minutes it takes to do that, than it is versus doing it on a virtual instrument? You know, because it's just it's just octaves on a mini keyboard, a little USB keyboard. Anyway, great idea. It's interesting. Things like that I like to do, because what we could do is we could take, for instance, we could take this whole track and just use the active playlist, duplicate it, go back to the original one, you know where I'm going, and maybe put an amp sim on it. You want to talk about wrong? That's freaking awesome. And then maybe, let's get really wrong. Let's put a reverb on the bass sound. That makes no sense. Nobody does that. That's really silly. But I'm going to. So it's this kind of twisted logic that I absolutely love. I'm going to put the basic keyboard sound back in, but not the bass guitar, and put the whole thing together. Totally wrong, totally weird. All I can say is that, yeah, if this is all you've got and you want to try some weirdness out, do it. I mean, there's probably better pitching devices than just using that was the generic one I opened up in whatever DAW you have. You could use Melodyne to take it down. You could also Melodyne it a little bit more accurately afterwards, auto-tune it more accurately. It's great. Anyway, thank you ever so much for joining us. It's been a wonderful, wonderful Fact Friday. Please leave a bunch of comments and questions below. I'd love to know your opinions on where music is now, where it came from, and all of this, you know, conversation that people are having about, you know, the change in the music industry. A change in the genres of the music industry, I should say. Have a marvelous time recording and mixing. Great as ever to see you here, and stay safe, stay happy, and stay healthy.